Hi, my name is Chwee-Lye Chng. Chng is my last name. I am a retired professor from the University of North Texas, and I have been retired for 12 years, and I've worked at the university for 33 years. We are having this interview in Denton, Texas, where I have lived since 1981. Today is August 30th, Saturday, and I've been interviewed by two amazing people. I was born in 1948 in Singapore. Have you heard the movie Crazy Rich Asian? That's Singapore, okay? I'm not rich, but according to friends and family, I can be crazy, you know? And I was born in Singapore to my parents, and they had 4 kids. I have an older sister, who is 4 years older than me. I have a second sister who is a year older than me. I'm third in the family, and I have a younger brother. So 2 girls, 2 boys. Okay, my family followed a very traditional Asian profile. My father is the primary breadwinner. Okay, so he works outside, and works very hard. From my recollection, he works 6.5 days per week. Okay, I barely saw him, during the week, but I only see him on Sunday mornings for half a day, and then he has to go back to work, Sunday afternoon. So he works, and my mother handles all the household responsibilities. So it's a very, very traditional one. A little bit about the background. My dad is very academically smart. However, he had to drop out of school at 10th grade in order to find a job to support his poor family, my impoverished grandparents. My father did a host of jobs. He did hard labor, clerical jobs, and eventually worked his way to become the manager of the company that he was working at. So I felt very proud of it. However, my father has always regretted not finishing high school and not going to college. So from a very early age, he has always emphasized the importance of education. For example, at home, we're very poor, so we can never get anything, paid for unless we lie to him and saying this is what is needed in school. And then suddenly, he will give you the money to buy that. Because anything related to school, scholarship, education, that is, something absolutely important to him. So that's sort of the background that I had. And I'm very, very, very proud of being raised by this amazing family and my parents and what have you. I'm an introvert. It doesn't look like it, but I'm an introvert. I really don't really like to be in the limelight or on stage and what have you. But however, I've always wanted to be a teacher, which kind of disappoints my parents, because my parents were saying, son, you're book smart, you are fated to be a doctor, to be a surgeon, right? To be a lawyer, to be an architect, to be an engineer. Okay, but I always said, I want to be a teacher. Okay, and they're like, drop out of medical school, then be a teacher. But again, my point is, I've always enjoyed being a teacher. Okay, I set very, very simple goals and stuff. And so I went to college, did well in my bachelor's degree. I feel natural affiliation with studies, and so I do well without doing too much work. And I did a master's degree, and after completing my master's degree, my professor was saying, you're smart enough to do a PhD. Okay, you do a PhD in Malaysia, or you can do a PhD overseas. And my family is not prosperous and wealthy, and affluent. So I said, well, can't afford to go overseas. And so my professor said, well, you can apply for scholarships. So one of the scholarships that I applied for, in fact, it's the only scholarship I applied for at that time, was the Fulbright Scholarship. I'm sure you've heard of the Fulbright Scholarship. It's a very, very famous, fabulous. So I applied for the Fulbright Scholarship with no expectation that I would receive anything good. But to apply for the Fulbright Scholarship, you have to submit to at least 3 universities in the United States. And only if you are accepted in the United States do they even consider your Fulbright Scholarship, because Fulbright Scholarship requires that you do your PhD in a university. So I applied for 3 universities. The University of Ann Arbor, Michigan, because my major professor graduated there, to University of Berkeley, because I saw University of Berkeley in a movie, earthquake or something like that. And then University of Madison, Wisconsin, because I met somebody, who was traveling, and he said he's from Madison, Wisconsin, and it's a very good school. So I applied to all 3, and miracles on miracles, I got accepted in all 3. And then, miracles on miracles, in December of 1976, I received a letter, a positive letter from the Fulbright Foundation, saying that I was the recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship of 1977 from Malaysia. I was over the moon. I was like, wow, I could go to America and study for a PhD, and it wouldn't cost my parents a single cent. Everything will be paid for by this. Okay. However, 2 weeks later, I got another email, a letter from the Fulbright Foundation in Malaysia saying, oops, an error has been made. You did not get the Fulbright Scholarship. Okay, sorry. And I thought something was amiss. So I decided, I have to investigate. So I called the American Embassy in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, and made an appointment, to speak to the U.S. ambassador to Malaysia, because they were responsible for, orchestrating this Fulbright Scholarship in Malaysia. I was dressed well, met him, and this is like a TV movie. He invited me in, then he locked the front door, and escorted me, made me sit down, and he leaned forward, because I already told him I want to know. And he said, how can I help you? And I said, please tell me, am I the chosen recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship for 1977 from Malaysia? And he looked at me and he said, before I answer that, okay, please know that everything we talk about inside here is absolutely confidential. If you talk about what we talk about here, I will deny that we have ever met before. So I said, please tell me, am I the recipient of it? He said, yes, you are our candidate of choice. However, somebody from the Prime Minister's office contacted us and told us that they would like us to award the scholarship to another applicant who is more politically affiliated with the current government. I am so sorry to have caused you so much, upset and heartbreak. And at that moment, my world just spun out of control. I felt so betrayed by my government. I felt humiliated. Even though I was admitted to all 3 universities, all 3 universities were supposed to start in the fall of 1977, and this happened in the December 1976. I just said, So I told my dad, who is the primary breadwinner, I said, please, helped me start my doctoral program immediately. And of all the 3 universities that I asked to start, only Madison, Wisconsin agreed to allow me to start a PhD program ahead of the fall semester. And that's why I ended up in Wisconsin. My choice was to go to Berkeley, okay, which is California and everything else there. And the life lesson to learn here is that sometimes, disappointments, okay, injustice, there's a hidden benefit to it. Had I not lost the scholarship, I would be in Berkeley. I would never have met Jackson, and you and I would not be having this conversation today. So that's sort of the background of how I ended up in the U.S. at Berkeley, California. And the ugly part about it is that I knew I was going to start in the spring of 1977. I had a lot of time to prepare. But because I suddenly decided I need to leave the country immediately, I just, got on a flight and flew. I didn't investigate. In 1977, there was no internet, no iPhone. So I didn't really know that I was flying into Wisconsin-Madison in one of the coldest winters in decades. I almost froze to death. And I have never told this story about almost being frozen to death to any of my family in Asia because I don't want them to worry about me and stuff. But, I am academically prepared to attend school in the US, but I had no understanding that the climate could really shipwreck me. Okay, so that's sort of the background. You asked me to describe that, okay?
Yes.
Let me figure out, is there anything? And one reason why I wanted to come to the US is because I really wanted to heal from the pain. I needed to distance myself, from the horror. And I thought the only way is to get away from it and get here. And in some ways, it also sort of emotionally and philosophically prepared me for this new journey here. Okay, and my time in the American culture was phenomenal because in Malaysia, everything was very, very restrictive. Okay, there were very few books available. There were a lot of books that were banned. Okay, and when I came to the University of Wisconsin, I just spent a lot of time walking through the library. Okay, picking up books that I've only heard of. I mean, never got a chance to. For example, I'm into literature, and I heard about D.H. Lawrence, one of the favorite writers, and he wrote this fabulous book, Sons and Lovers, and Lady Chatterjee's Lover. And in Malaysia, you can access other books, but Lady Chatterjee's Lover was banned. And I remember I was walking through the shelf and I picked up Lady Chatterjee's Lover, and I was thinking, wow, they have left this on the shelf for anyone to pick up. Okay, and it was emblematic of what my life in the US is going to be. I can literally study anything I like and become the person that I'm supposed to be. And so in many, many ways, I was so pleased to be set free from the confinement of it all. In some ways, had I not lost the Fulbright scholarship, part of the requirement of a Fulbright scholar is that you have to return back to your home country. And you have to be working there for at least 5 years before you take off, which is going to be, a little bit complicated in that. So my life journey was just set free because of this injustice thing, which I am so, so, so grateful for. interesting story, right? You know, I grew up in Asia, okay? And I grew up in Asia living as an Asian among other Asians. I have never ever had to explain Asian cultural values and traits to other people. Okay, so as a result, I took my Asian culture for granted. And it was when I came to the US that I found that for the most part, in any social setting, I am the only Asian in the room. And people generally, if there's anything relevant, they will say, well, what's your perspective? And I almost have to like give them the Asian perspective. And so I have to like literally, you know, learn more about Asian culture. And it's like, oh, why do you use chopsticks? Why do you take off shoes? Why do you do all these other things there? And so even though I have done that before, I never knew the meaning of it all. And so I literally have to go online and go to the library and research. And so as a result, I come from a family of 4 kids, okay, but I'm the only one who lived overseas in the U.S. But according to them, I am the most Asian proficient. I'm the only one who's learned how to speak, write, and read, Chinese. Okay, I'm the only one who gives talks about Asian cultures and stuff. Okay, and so again, somehow being forced to stand out in a crowd and defend it, has a benefit to it too. But again, let me tell you about my first experience here. So when I came to Wisconsin-Madison, okay, in the height of winter, so the first graduate class, I was sitting there, and the professor had the graduate students, doctoral students, all sitting in a circle. They say, well, I want you to introduce yourself to the class. So I want you to stand in front of the board, and I want you to write your full name, and help the class, pronounce your name. So everybody went around. Then it's my turn. So I wrote my name, Chng Chwee-Lye. Mistake number 1. In Asian culture, you always start with your last name. Yeah, and say like, Mr. Lai. No. Chwee-Lye is my name. It's like, no. So I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, in the US, you reverse it. In Asia, I would say Chng Chwee-Lye because your family name, gets prominence here. So anyway, the first day I wrote it down there, and my classmates, who were all PhD students, were like, how do we pronounce your name? Your last name has no vowels. How do you pronounce a sound with no vowels? I said, I never thought of having no vowels. And Chwee-Lye, it sounds so weird spelling. And so one of my classmates raised his hand and said, hey, can you help us here? Can you take on an American, English name for us? Okay, and I reflected on it. I smiled, and I'm just telling you, if I were a teenager coming to the U.S. or maybe a younger adult attending school, probably would succumb to it and saying, sure, call me Jackie, call me David, okay. Call me Vincent. Yeah. But, I at that moment in time felt I needed to stand out and protect my Asian heritage and culture and stuff. So I said no. I told them my name and my last name were chosen by my parents and grandparents with specific meaning, and I can't change it. Okay. However, I recognize that my name with the English translation of that is challenging for non-Asian eyes and ears and tongues. So I would help you learn how to say. I say my name is Chwee. Chewy sounds like, if you chew gum a long time, the gum is very chewy. Well, that's my name, Chewy. Lie is to lie down, the same sound. So if you imagine me lying down chewing gum, that's my name. And so suddenly the whole class just laughed and applauded, and they're like, oh, that's so cool, so cool, so cool. End of the day, everybody knew my name by that point in time. But I literally had to access the part of me that felt I really, really, really need to embrace, defend my cultural roots there, because it's so easy to lose it. I graduated in 1981. You know, University of Madison, Wisconsin is a premier university. However, I tolerated 3 cold winters. And I was not going to tolerate one more winter. So I decided that I was going to only apply to schools or universities further south. Not for any other reason other than it was, tolerable temperature, okay? And, while I was on campus, I came out as gay, okay? And which is, again, sort of a very important part of it. Academically, I had freedom to choose, and I was away from my biological family, so I could think for myself. I was separated from my evangelical, Christian church I grew up in. So I was able to sort of step back, think, reflect, and I finally came to see that I identify as gay. And I came out in a very academic way. Came out on campus. I came out going to the library and reading every book on homosexuality, okay, and learned, in 4 years earlier, the American Psychiatric Association voted unanimously to drop homosexuality as the list of, conditions that needed to be corrected, okay, diagnosis, dysfunction, and suddenly they were saying being homosexual, being gay is part of the spectrum. It is not considered delinquent and needing to be addressed and stuff. And I read everything. Then when I felt comfortable, I picked up the phone and called a hotline on campus, spoke to a counselor, asked all the questions. Then later on, I felt comfortable. I went in to speak to the counselor in person, who told me that they're forming a new group called a coming out support group, where all students on campus who are interested in exploring their sexuality can become part of it. I decided to join. And I just continued to navigate this journey where I became more and more comfortable with it, And so I suddenly realized that I have this academic self, PhD professor, and I have this gay self, which is increasingly becoming important. And so temporarily, my Asian self receded in the background while I focused on these 2 things. So on campus, I was a faculty sponsor of a student group at UNT. Well, this is again very interesting, a very Asian way of doing it. I have 3 students who came to my office, and they're like, Dr. Chng, we are UNT students, we identify as gay. We would like to start a student group on campus. However, the university prescribes that to be an official group on campus, you have to have a sponsor who is a faculty or a staff member. We have asked a lot of people on campus and no one has said yes. You are our last hope. We heard that you may be interested. So I said, sure, tell me more about it. So we talked a little bit about what they wanted to do, and I said, well, give me 2 days. I'll think about it. So I went home. I spoke to Jackson about it. I said, what do you think? Because my actions are going to impact his life here. And he said, do whatever you want to. I'm in full support of you. So I said, good, check. Husband says, okay. Then the next day, I went to see my chair department, and I told him, students wanted me to sponsor them. Do you have any problems? And my chair at that time said, I personally have no problems. But you do know that you are in the Deep South. Okay? Denton is the buckle of the Bible Belt here. Okay? There may be conservative people who are not going to take very kindly to you being so out and open about it, and it could possibly impact your time on campus and interfere with your ability to get promoted into, associate and full professors. But I'm an optimist. I only choose to listen to the first part. My chair had no problems with me sponsoring this group. So then I went to my dean and again told him about it, and like my chair, he said exactly the same thing. I personally have no problems, but you do know this is a very conservative environment here. So I finally thought, well, my chair had no problems. My husband is supportive. My dean has no problem. So I called the students and saying, sure, I'll sponsor the group. Let's figure out, when. And so we were able to decide, there was a space on campus, okay, United Methodist Center on campus. It was a center that was available for student use, so we got the use of it. And so we took an ad at the student newspaper and saying, we are starting a group to support, GLBTQ students on campus. If you're interested, come and join us on, Wednesday at 7 o'clock at the center. So as the time got close, the students and I walked to the United Methodist Center, and when we got to the entrance, we saw a group of protesters with signs, horrible signs, homosexuals will go to hell, and and they were chanting. And that day, anyone who wanted to explore joining this group had to walk to protest. I'm sure there were students who wanted to join who saw it and walked away. Okay? And many of the people who were protesting were not from not on campus. They were religious people surrounding Denton who saw the ad from students and decided to protest. Because how dare you, gay students, want to start a group on campus? So that day, 12 students on campus and myself walked through, okay, having people scream at us. We went inside, we sat down, we gave each other hugs, and we talked a little bit about what we wanted to do. And I said, first thing first, we have to find a name for our group. And one of the students said, it took us courage to walk through the demonstration. Let's call our group Courage, which is like so cool. It was no gay, lesbian, no, it was Courage. So we became that group, okay? And that's not the end of the story. The story was that, so the next day, I walked in to my office, and my office secretary was like, she had a smile, a sheepish smile. She said, Dr. Chng, how are you? I said, hi, I'm fine. She said, I left the college newspaper, on your desk. I think you should read it. I said, that's so strange for you. So I walked in, and on the university newsletter front page was this headline: new student group founded, launched, for UNT student. Okay, faculty sponsor Dr. Chwee-Lye Chng, and my name was just spread all over it. Okay. Was I glad I spoke to my chair? Was I glad I spoke to my dean? Was I glad I spoke to Jackson? Okay, but that's not the end of the story. So everything was very, very public and dramatic. It's almost like a movie kind of thing. And the next week, Wednesday, when we had our meeting, the first meeting we had 12 students and me. The second meeting we had almost 200 students who came to join us. Not all gay. They were gay students, okay? But they were also allies, people who objected to folks, demonstrating and doing horrible things and all that. And from that moment on, every week, our group became bigger and bigger, and we attracted students from TWU, to join. We didn't exclude anyone. I said, if you want to join the group, fine. And so it was a very, very welcoming, supportive place for people to make friends and, grow and be educated and stuff. So I really, really feel very, very privileged to have done that. So at that point in time, my effort was all focused on GLBTQ issues here. But I also recognize that while I have a lot of friends who were very supportive of my GLBTQ's identities and issues, they don't really understand my Asian self part of it. Okay, and the only people who understood me were the people I met at conferences. When I would go to a national conference, I would meet friends from San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Pennsylvania. And these were Asian faces, they had PhDs, they had MPHs, and we just hung out. And I always felt very sad to leave them because these were people who understood my multiple cultures, including my Asian culture. We would all eat at Asian restaurants at conferences and stuff, okay? And so many of them subsequently told me, it's like, hey, why don't you start a group in Texas? We have a lot of Asian groups, okay, in the Midwest and in either coast. But in the South, zero. Why don't you start it? So I finally, at that point in time, I was sitting on the board of the Gay Lesbian Community Center at Cedar Springs. Again, I was the only Asian on board there. And I told them that I'm interested in starting it. So the board told me, hey, we want to support your intention to start this group. And the way we do it is we are going to grant you the use of our facility. Your group can meet in this building without paying rent for a year. I thought, how cool is that? Okay, they're benefiting us. So again, so I decided to put an ad in the Dallas Voice in newspaper talking we're going to start a group addressing GLBTQ, but particularly with Asian heritage and stuff. Please, if you're interested, join. And so after putting the ad at the first meeting for Dragonflies, 4 people came up, 4 Asian men from the Philippines, all right, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and from China, okay? And we're all Asians, and we all have very, very similar experiences of being the only Asian in our culture, and we felt so excited to be in the company of other Asians who are also gay, and when we're talking about our relationship with the family, our pressure to be academically strong or to be conforming, to all those other things, we all understood each other instinctively. We were able to laugh at each other's stuff constantly. And that's how we, started this group here. Even though we were all Asian, we all had to speak English because English was the only language that all of us share, even though we speak Asian languages, but and again it was wonderful. So at that time I said, well, one of the first things you need to do is we have to give ourselves a name. I say, at that point in time, all the gay Asian groups in that country, San Francisco, New York, Washington, they always have names like Gay Asian Pacific Islander, GAPA this, GAPA that, or Washington, GAPA. It was so boring and it's unsexy name. So I told them, it's like, no. We have to come up with something sexy. So we voted and we came up with the name Dragonflies. Okay, is it the dragon that I was thinking, the dragon, Asian dragon that flies, in flight? But people end up thinking of the insect dragonflies. I said, I don't care. Okay, it is a name that that is fun and memorable and what have you. And that group that started in 1994 is still operational today. And one reason why we are still operational today, particularly in doing volunteer work at, attending a supper club every second Saturday of the month. Okay, we provide home cooked meals to residents of the Ewing House, which are men, women, and children impacted by HIV. It is it is because in the early days, one of our members, Dragonfly members, contracted HIV and was struggling and was kicked out of his apartment and was homeless, and then ended up at the Ewing House. And many of us heard about it, and we came to visit him and support him, and we thought, wow, what an amazing group for people who were taking care of other people. So we decided to volunteer by feeding residents there on second Saturday of the month. And we've been doing that ever since. Okay? That's sort of the story of how my identities sort of merged. Okay, so I have professorial identities, I have gay identity, now I have my Asian identity, and activism, community leader, community supportship, and all that. I see myself as a college professor, teacher, okay, mentor to my students, and besides teaching subjects to students, I am a researcher, and I like to research on things that interest me. So I very often, whenever I do research, I always want to include, sort of the cultural aspects of it. Okay, to analyze the data based on how people identify Asian, Black, Latino, white, to see if their responses, and very often Asians, respond very differently, which makes it interesting for me to understand and analyze stuff. So I like that part of it. So as a result of it, I established a reputation through publications and contracts and everything else there of people sort of working with cultural stuff. For example, in Dallas, I have helped community groups that work with Black men who are infected by HIV or at risk for HIV, Latino men, immigrants from Southeast Asia. I mean, all these are sort of things that interest me, because I always believe that your culture, your social group can impact how you live, impact your decision, and what have you. And so I always like to include that. And in the process of teaching my students, I'm also helping them understand, hey, later on when you're working and doing research and helping people, don't ignore this, cultural piece that can severely impact, what you do and stuff. So in some ways, I feel that I am having an impact on the future generation, helping them become a little bit more inclusive, of that. I got very, so I'm an academic, but I'm also an activist, okay, which is slightly different. And even though I did a lot of research on HIV, I really, I don't have HIV, but I have friends who have HIV, okay? And during the early days of HIV in the late 80s, early 90s, and what have you, there were a lot of people who were, impacted by HIV. No, I don't have it here, but yeah, no, but I was saying is that there was a piece of artwork, that I don't have it here. It's of a friend of mine who is an artist, and he's the first friend I have that I know who had HIV. So what was happening was that his name is Jonathan, and one day I got a phone call from Jonathan's husband, who said, hey, Jonathan is sick in hospital and quite seriously sick. If you want to say goodbye, you better come, So Jackson and I immediately hopped on our car and drove down to Parkland Hospital. Parkland Hospital in the early days is the hospital for people who don't have good insurance. So it's a community-based hospital where you can, So we went there, and at the front desk, they told us where he was. So we went there, and it was this dark corridor. Once I got to the door, I saw a hazard sign on the door, which announces very, very clearly, like, we're in danger, danger, be careful, put on a mask, kind of stuff. And then outside the door, I saw abandoned trays of food. Obviously, people brought food but didn't have the courage to go in. And I thought, oh gosh. So I knocked on the door. Nothing came. So I opened the door. It was completely dark. As I walked in, I was greeted with this strong, strong atmospheric stench and smell of shit and urine. And it's like a toilet that hasn't been cleaned for a long time. And obviously, my friend was on the hospital bed, semi-conscious, okay, having to smell, okay, having no one coming in to clean him, hungry as anything else. So I was very, very, very traumatized by it. I immediately went to the window, opened the window to edit this. I told Jackson, please go down to the shop and buy cans and cans of air fresheners and come up here. And so we bought air fresheners, we sprayed the room, we bought detergent, we cleaned the room, and I thought, oh gosh. So I went straight to the nurse's desk on the floor, and I said, could I speak to the staff nurse? She came, and I made eye contact with her, and I said, my friend is in that room. What you folks are doing to take care of him is atrociously wrong, morally wrong, illegally wrong. If you don't change and take good care of him, I swear I would drive to Austin, Texas. I will report to the medical authorities responsible for your license, and I will make sure that you will not practice medicine ever again. And because I am familiar with public health and community, I knew the language, I knew exactly what the mechanism is, and I could tell that they knew, they made a big, big mistake. So the next day, when I came back, everything was fine. There was no food left outside. Okay, the room was clean, and things improved. The sad part of the news is Jonathan never recovered. He died. Okay, but that was Parkland Hospital in the early days. Today, Parkland Hospital is the best community hospital for anyone who has HIV, who have no insurance. They give very, very high quality, compassionate care. And I dare say that a lot of it has to do with the fact that people were able to advocate for those who have no voice, to argue, to do all the other things there. So in that sense, I'm an activist. So I'm academic, and I protest at city council. I do all kinds of other things for people who mistreat other people. And so in some sense, we have different identities, but we have to protect all of them. Yeah. I always feel that I am the only Asian, and so it is my responsibility to ensure that the Asian perspective, Asian traits, Asian sensibilities are highlighted. Okay, and so I have to speak up. And one of the ways to speak up is to be knowledgeable. So as a result, I literally dig deep into Asian cultures. Okay, and I realized, I'm not Vietnamese, I'm not Cambodian, I'm not Korean, but we're Asian, and we share a lot of Asian values, role of family, all that. So I as a result become very, very comfortable and knowledgeable about Asian cultures beyond my Chinese, Singaporean, Malaysian stuff. Okay, I I again continue to to do research, continue to advocate, continue to volunteer, okay, in groups, primarily because it's sort of important to have a voice. So that's why I say I love the fact that you folks are having a foundation, having an archive, having to ensure that people remember, that we were here once upon a time, and this is what we have done, kind of thing. And not everything is about Chinese restaurants. It's about the people and why and how and what have you, kind of stuff here. I was recently interviewed by CBS on Channel 11. Okay, they wanted to interview me as an Asian American, but it got so long and complicated that by the time they were finishing it, the month, the Asian month, was kind of slipping away. And the good part of it, the next month was Queer Month, Pride Month. And so they're like, good, you will be the best candidate because you could represent the Asian and the queer part of it, okay? And so for me, being able to represent was very, very special. This is to show you, we have lived here since mid-1980s, so 40-something years, 45, 47 years here. And this is the neighborhood. I grew up here. And the other day, I was watering the front lawn, and there were two middle-aged elderly people walking by, and they say, "Hey, neighbor, I just saw you on TV, good." So they saw the interview on CBS where I talked about my role in that, and again it's like, good. So people can now connect, that we have a story that we need to tell, we have values, we have beliefs and stuff. I also think that for me, the biggest challenge is to, and again, this is to share some wisdom with you folks here, is we sometimes get so invested in things that are important to us that we can burn out because we don't spend enough time. Okay, I remember I had a college dean. Being a dean of a university is exhausting. Okay, but this is a dean who's very academic, publishes articles, book reviews, write books. So I was blown away. So I remember asking him, I said, "Hey, how do you manage to be so productive while still doing all these things?" And he said, "Let me tell you a secret." He said, "Things don't happen by mistake. You have to give it time." He says, "I, have deliberately carved out time during the week." Okay, say for example, he says, "And I teach classes, I do have meetings and stuff. So my secretary, will if people wanted to see me, they will look at it and see what times are available, where he's not otherwise occupied." So he has deliberately, once or twice a week, carved out 2 hours that, as far as the office staff is concerned, he's unavailable. As far as he's concerned, this is his free time to process. And the way he did it, and I have imitated him, is that he has deliberately locked the door in his office. Because if you stay in the office, people will knock on the door and the phone will ring, and then you don't have that free time. So he said he would leave his office, turn his phone off so that nobody can reach him, and he will walk to the library, to the top floor, and find himself into a little corner, and he would just spend an hour to 2 hours there reading things that he needed time to read and think, closing his eyes, meditating, doing whatever he needs to recharge his batteries. Okay? And when I heard about it, I thought, wow, that makes so much sense. And I've been doing that. I deliberately, people ask me, it's like, how do you get so much energy? Okay, you don't function like a typical, elderly person. I say, because I give myself time to recharge. Okay, I'm 77, so when I'm awake and active for 5 hours, I usually will take a half hour and a 45-minute break, take a nap. And that nap will recharge my battery where I can go on for another 5 to 7 hours. Then I take another nap. Okay, and it's these little things here that truly benefits us to be able to address so many things that we have there, especially when I have so many challenging, conflicting, so it's like, I'm an academic, I'm an activist, I'm Asian, I'm queer, I'm part of a marriage, I'm taking care of my dog. I mean, there's so many things that can distract you. But if you deliberately carved out time for you to recharge, all right, things can be done, okay? But it requires that you are organized. Okay, I remember one time I was giving a talk to a company, and I had a student of mine who one day came to me and said, "Hey, Dr. Chng, my father's company would like to, see if you can come and give a talk to his office, and I said, sure, So I went there, and so it was a lunchtime, so I gave a talk, okay, and it was fine, So the next year I went back to give another talk. So while I was there, after giving a talk, I would talk about health and stuff. So people who wanted to talk to me would come up. So there were 3 or 4 women who came up to me, and I thought, oh, hi ladies, how can I help you? And one of the ladies came up to me, is like, Dr. Chng, do you remember me? Which is a horrible question to ask. And I usually say, and I cheat. I say, you look familiar, but I don't remember. She said, well, Dr. Chng, you don't remember me because I am 100 pounds less than when you saw me last year. I thought, oh, really? And then she turned to her friends. She said, this is the man who helped me lose those 100 pounds. And I thought, my dear, I don't remember that. Tell me, what did I do? He says, well, last year you came to give a talk about health and fitness and how to change into stuff, and you told us you don't have to join a gym, you don't have to squeeze yourself into spandex, you just have to get yourself a pair of walking shoes that are comfortable, an outfit that you are comfortable using it, and that's all. Okay, everybody can do that. You don't have to find reasons why you cannot do that. And then just go and walk for 15 minutes. You don't have to walk fast, just have to walk for 15 minutes. And it made them understand it's easy to do. I don't have to hide excuses why I can't do that. So she decided to do it, and she walked for a couple of weeks, and it really made her feel better, and wise. And soon her husband saw it and said, oh, let me join you. So the husband, and then her kids started joining her, so it became a family affair. Soon the neighbors saw them doing it, and they all decided to join, and it became a walking club in the neighborhood. Okay, people started walking, and eventually they decided to do it twice a day. Okay, and 3 times a week or whatever it is. That's how she lost her 100 pounds. Gradually, consistency, effort, and became communal. It was a time for the neighborhood people to get to know each other and everything else. And again, I just thought, wow, okay, to have an impact on people that you really didn't think so, but I sort of translate it into terms. So I sometimes feel I love being a teacher. I love being a mentor. I love doing things because they can seriously help people to develop. It's like I had this young man who was a recent graduate of a high school who just told me, he says, I identify as Asian and queer. I love what you do. I love what you have done with Dragonflies. I would like to write a play based on Dragonflies. And so he interviewed me very in depth to get the story, and he was like, "Oh, this would be, the first scene, the second scene, the climax, I mean, he was processing it, okay, and he wanted to do Dragonflies because Dragonflies story resonated with him, okay, and it was wonderful to know that something I have done in 1994 has resonated with a lot of people, okay, to the extent that they wanted to. And so I said, do I have any say as to who is going to play me on stage, So I said, all the other is Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and they're too old and unattractive to depict me. I want younger ones here, so we're laughing over this thing here. But again, it was so inspirational to know that there are people who are so impacted by you that they want to create. And there's an honors thesis, there's a class project, there's interviews, and you folks are doing all these things. So it's like, I'm 77, I don't know how long I will be on this planet, but I feel very, very privileged to be able to make a difference in some small, humble little way that connects with people. Politically and historically, Asian immigrants have been targeted and portrayed very, very differently. And it guts me that, America takes pride in being, the best, the most welcoming, the most this, that, and the other. And yet we have a very, very dark history. We forget, okay, that, Chinese immigrants, helped build a rail, the transcontinental railroad throughout the country, kind of thing, okay. But we also forget that we mistreated, them by not paying the same wages. We have, history in the country where we put into law where, Asians cannot, cannot bear witness against people who discriminate against them. Chinese people are the only people in history who have been excluded. Okay, so that's the piece of stuff that makes me embarrassed. That on the one hand we think that we're the best in the world, and yet you have this dark history. Okay, but once you know the dark history, then we should feel energized to fight for it. So I always, tell people that, I'll give an example. I was once teaching a class. I remember I told you I have a sexuality class with 900 students in class. So I wanted to demonstrate to students about something. So I told everyone, stand up. I said, sit down if you haven't been stopped by a traffic cop on the highway. The people still standing up are people who have been stopped. I said, sit down if you haven't been stopped by a traffic cop in the last 6 months. Prop. Last 3 months. Prop. And soon the only people still standing in class were all dark-skinned, black men and black women. And you can tell that the whole class was like freaking out because it was so dramatic. Okay, so I went on the mic and I interviewed them. I said, tell me. And some of these students were saying, hey, I live in Dallas. I drive to Denton to attend school, and I get stopped by traffic cops once or twice a month. Okay, and I have students who were not black, who were tearing up and horrified, that their classmates, okay, was discriminated and mistreated that way. And they were seated next to them, probably share a meal with them, probably did things with them, but never knew that they had these deep scars in them. And that is, again, my goal as a teacher and therapist or whatever you, in saying, you kind of, please don't assume that everybody has the same thing. You have to create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing with you there. Okay? I'll give you another example. When I first came out, on campus in Madison, Wisconsin. So one time Jackson decided, hey, let's go and have fun. Let's go dancing. Okay? In those days, discos and stuff. So let's go dancing. And the best dance clubs are in Chicago. Jackson used to work in Chicago. So he said, hey, so a group of friends decided from Wisconsin to drive to Chicago to go to this, gay discotheque. So we were there standing in line. It was the most popular discotheque in the area. So Jackson and I walked in, and they asked for photo ID. We showed photo ID. We walked in, and with 2 or 3 friends behind us, and we said, hey, we'll go inside there. It's air conditioning. We'll wait for you there. So we went in there, and 15 minutes later, our friends still didn't come in, and we were like, let's go outside. So we went out there, and the bouncer was arguing with our friends there, and they were shouting at each other. And we came out there, hey, what's happening? And our friends were saying, this bastard, okay, wants us to provide 3 photo IDs before he will allow us to go in. And I came down here, I said, hey, you asked only 1 photo ID from us to get in, and we walked in there. Why do you ask 3? Okay, that's discrimination. Okay, this is a gay club. These are gay clients, and they were discriminating against this specific dark skin. And he said, I work here, and this is what my boss tells me. So I said, call your boss out here. Okay. So I started organizing the people there. I started telling everyone who's standing in line, this is a horrible place. Don't go in there. They discriminate against people based on race and stuff. There's a better discotheque around the corner. Let's all go, kind of thing. We shut this thing down. And so the boss came out, and he said, hey, what are you doing? Why are you... And we said, you are being racist and discriminatory against this thing. And he said, well, the reason why we do that is because black customers, when they come in there, they only order 1 drink the whole evening. We can't survive on that. I say, it's your issue. You can't discriminate against black people based on that. I say, I was allowed in, by the way, I don't drink. I will probably only drink water. You're not making money on me based on your choice. So again, but at that moment in time, when I was at the gay disco there, it helped me understand, that society can discriminate on you in subtle and not so subtle ways that can impact you. When you are a black gay man and you have you've been discriminated, by gay businesses who should be on your side, and you're thinking, what is happening to my world? How can they have good mental health and good self-concept and what have you? So these are sort of the things that make me into an activist. Okay? And people ask me, it's like, you're an academic, you publish articles and do all the other things, and yet you are somebody who protests and do crazy things. Because we have to, because the world requires that we protest against things that are injustice and unfair and what have you. And I hope that my story and making students stand up and watching it help them understand that we have to give voice to. Again, going back to the idea of Asians. Asians generally are uncomfortable speaking out openly. We feel embarrassed. Okay, I'm drawing attention to defects and stuff like that. And so I sometimes feel that I speak on behalf of people who dare not speak or don't feel comfortable speaking and what have you. So that's the part that I really, really, like. Yeah. And the other part about things that matter to me is that I'm sure you've heard of the murder of Vincent Chin, okay, in Detroit. Okay, it was in 1982 and thereabouts. So I came here in 1981, and I heard about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, they literally, you know, killed him, because they thought that he was, responsible for them losing their job, what have you. And the legal system was so prejudiced that the people who killed got a slap on the wrist, and that's all. And I remember feeling, wow, okay, America is so racist, we have to speak up. And I remember joining a local protest group, nearby, protesting this thing. So these are these are aspects of American history, contemporary society, that we need to remember in order to be prudent, careful, courageous, consistent in changing this. And I'm hoping that Dragonflies and other activity I've done have given people the courage to speak up, to advocate on behalf of other people. In general, even in the 80s, Asians generally don't step up to the for limelight yet. And I remember in the 80s, I'm usually one of the first few who speak up. So that's why I think it may be cultural values. Asians generally, I remember from the time we were young, is don't speak up, don't draw attention. If you draw attention, you'll be the first to, so it's like, put your head down, don't make eye contact. And so I'm always fighting that cultural urge and practice of, not drawing attention, and then having to be, for example, I am an introvert. So I am perfectly comfortable, not being on limelight, not giving interviews, not doing any of these other things. But I like to be, in a corner reading or reflecting or writing and whatever you. But I also realized that in order to teach and inspire, I have to be comfortable to be on stage. So I literally push myself through the practice deliberately. You don't know how much practice I do to do this. And people say, oh, you're such a natural. It's like, no, this is not in my DNA. I do it because it is absolutely essential and important, to feel comfortable and effective on stage. And my attitude is, it's a skill. I will learn the skill. Okay, but my point is, and I've always told people I mentor, students, and what have you, is, this is my philosophy. My students always laugh when they I say, in life, nothing is impossible. Everything is possible if you are willing to pay the price. If you want to, learn to scale Mount Everest, if you want to learn how to roller skate, if you want to learn how to fly the plane, if you want to learn how to, whatever you want to do, if you're prepared to put in the effort, it can be done. And I exemplify that. Okay? I'll give you one example. I grew up in Asia, Asian among Asians, so I sort of take a lot of my Asian cultural values, for granted. And I knew enough Asian vocabulary to be able to order food at a restaurant, okay? And but I have never been able to read, write, or speak fluent Mandarin, okay? And I remember, I'll give you one example. So one time during the early days of my professor, so one time it was like Lunar New Year or whatever so Chinese Students Association at North Texas decided to have a celebration. So they invited a lot of professors to attend. So I went there and they potlucked stuff and all that. And so all the professors were on stage, okay? They were honoring them, they all came. And all the professors on stage were non-Asian. I was the only Asian on there. And so they subsequently passed the mic to every professor, who were wishing the students, Happy New Year, and So, and I was the last person there, and I was thinking, oh gosh, I am Asian, I'm representing Asian culture. So I thought, I have to say something in Chinese. Okay, so it gave me time to think. I keep thinking, how do I say Happy New Year in Chinese? I said I've seen enough Chinese movies to kind of figure it out. So I actually found it. So 恭喜发财, whatever. And so by the time they came to me, I already rehearsed in my head and my tongue and stuff. I spoke, 大家好, 祝福大家新年快乐, da 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 da. So I was fairly comfortable. So after the event, a group of Chinese students, okay, rushed to me and started chit-chatting with me in Mandarin, full Mandarin. And I said, stop, I don't speak Mandarin. And they're like, you spoke perfect Mandarin before. We thought that you were fluent in it. And I remember feeling so embarrassed that I, being ethnically Chinese, didn't know how to speak fluent Mandarin, okay? And I've always wanted to. The year before I retired in 2013, 2012, I decided, I think I want to learn how to speak Chinese, okay? At that time, I suddenly discovered that UNT has an international language department, and Chinese is being offered as a language there. So I found the teacher, the professor, instructor there, and I made an appointment, came in to see her, Miss Chng. Okay, it was a teacher, and I told her what I wanted to do, and she said, well, we have beginning, intermediate, and advanced. What level would you like to have? I said, well, I don't know, but can I, for 1 week, just experiment and test all these classes, So for that week, in addition to my duties as a college professor, I attended Chinese classes at the beginning, intermediate, and advanced. At the end of the week, I had a meeting with Miss Chen, and she said, well, Dr. Chng, what would you like? I said, all of the classes were interesting and beneficial to me. I really hate. I said, would you be particularly upset if I attended all 3 classes? She said, no, if you can handle it, sure. I'm an over-Asian achiever here. So I attended 3 levels of Chinese language classes per semester, during the last year before I retired, okay? But it was fabulous. It was like me finally devoting time and energy and joy in discovering my Asian identity that I've kept. I have not stopped learning Chinese for the last 12 years. I have to date, this I'm bragging now, I have to date written over 300 Chinese essays with Chinese characters and stuff. And so Jackson is like, you have written 300, why don't you publish it in a book? I said, no, it's not for publishing. I'm just writing it because I wanted to express myself. Okay, so I think I said, well, how do I say that in Chinese, whereas, it fits all the rules and stuff. So because I am friendly with a lot of Chinese scholars, I have professors in China that I edit their English essays and they edit my Chinese essays. And so both of us are improving in the language that we want to. And so as a result, a lot of people are saying, it's like, how the hell do you learn Chinese in the US where Chinese is so rarely spoken. I said, well, if you're willing to pay the price, nothing is impossible. If I can learn Chinese, anyone can learn anything. Okay? So again, is you have to, and I don't want to be distracted by, do it. It's like I do it because of joy. Okay? And so my relatives in Asia are saying, we live in Asia surrounded by Chinese speaking people and we don't even speak that. Okay? I say, a lot of it is intention. So because I live in the United States, I'm a minority. I have to work harder to claim my Chinese heritage. Therefore, as a result of the hard work, I, I work harder at learning accents, learning cultural history, learning, legal laws that discriminate against, Asians and what have you. So again, these are sort of the things that are important. I actually, I say that in my autumn days, I like to be remembered as somebody who is in touch with my Asian roots, okay, to be a good mentor, okay, to the next generation, give them practical advice, give them wise, counseling and stuff. I'm able to sort of pass the torch to the next generation. It's the way I sort of see myself as somebody to be remembered. And that's why for me, to have undergraduate students do a class project on dragonflies, to have an undergraduate student do an honors thesis on dragonflies, to have a high school student wanting to write a play on dragonflies, okay, is emotionally, very inspirational. It means that I have made an impact to them, that they now want to do something, okay? Because for them it's remembering history, all right? Remembering what somebody else has done. And one of the questions they always ask me is, wow, how did you come out, as gay? How did you fight for Asian rights and all that? And it's a different culture. It's in the 90s, different from this. How do you do all these things without iPhone and without Google search and all that? I say, well, if I can do it in those days, you can do it with ChatGPT. So the world is much more different today, but in that way, it's like I like to inspire people to feel that they have the courage and determination to carve a world that they want and they treasure and what have you. For me, for example, to be interviewed by you too, I'm blown away because I am so inspired by the founding of your organization, by your skills, by the people that you interviewed. I mean, I told you I saw the upload, and I had to cry in different places because their stories were so powerful. It resonated with me. It told me about what it was like. Okay, we all have the story of fighting to not drowning, to making a difference, and that. So again, I like to be remembered as a person who has created safe spaces for people who feel unsafe. Okay, it's like I take my dog for a walk in the park every day, and I told Jackson, I said, I have met more and more people who are living in their cars. Okay, and so I was like, it helps me not complain so much about stuff because at least I'm not living in a car. Okay, I have all these other things around me here. Yeah, so it's inconvenient. But again, there are so many other people who really are struggling. So for me, it's just if you can lift somebody's burden temporarily, if you can make eye contact with them and put a smile on their face, that is better than doing nothing. So I always tell people, you don't have to set huge goals, but don't be surprised if something that you say or do can result, like I told you about somebody losing 100 pounds, and they say, this is a guy who helped me lose 100 pounds. And it was like, I'm not your personal trainer, but something I said, helped you make your decision to change your behavior that resulted in you, being healthy and what have you. So, so that's sort of kind of the thing I want.